2001, it accepted and moved towards a ceasefire of 2002. During the peace process, however, US support and assistance tilted the military balance in favour of the Sri Lankan armed forces, triggering the collapse of the LTTE and setting off the mass killings of 2009. Before this, in 2007, the US entered into a military agreement with the Sri Lankan government known as the Access and Cross-Servicing Agreement, at a time when no other government entered into such agreements at the time the massacres were ongoing. In late 2002, a delegation from the US Pacific Command visited Sri Lanka to make an assessment of the northeast. It noted that Trincomalee was controlled by the LTTE, and that as this was the most important base in the country, it should be secured first in order to effectively prosecute the war in Tamil Eelam. This American recommendation was made early in the peace process. When the war was renewed in July 2006, it commenced around Trincomalee as per the recommendation of the US military. In April 2003, after 6 successive rounds of peace talks, an abrupt suggestion for a pre-meeting in Washington, D.C. was made by the US, thereby violating the parity of status as the LTTE was banned in the United States and could not participate. This US initiative, therefore, thereafter known as the Washington Incident, set in motion the demise of the peace process. Prior to the 2009 Sri Lankan military offensive, the US shared with the government exclusive satellite images of the Trincomalee area. And 6 months after the massacres, a US government report was submitted to the Senate titled Sri Lanka, Recharting US Strategy After the War, indicating that the US could not afford to lose Sri Lanka because of its importance in the changing US focus towards Asia. Since 2009, there have been annual joint Sri Lanka-US military exercises in Trincomalee. The defeat of the LTTE in 2009, given the new US pivot towards Asia, is critically important for the US military presence and effectiveness in the region. Trincomalee Harbour became essential for the safe placement of US naval military capacity in the Indian Ocean, given the limitations of the US base at Diego Garcia. In respect of the charge that the US was complicit in genocide, it is clear that the provision of special military training, both in Sri Lanka and the US, enhanced the capacity of the Sri Lankan military. In addition, US support and assistance under the ACSA agreement, combined with training by the US Special Forces and commando training provided by Israel through the assistance of the US, appear to have made a difference to Sri Lankan military capacity. A week before the ceasefire, the Sri Lankan military trained and strengthened during the peace process and showed new strength, leadership and purpose when warfare was renewed. In the Colombo English daily The Island of the 9th of March 2002, the US ambassador to Sri Lanka, Ashley Wills, not only confirmed the provision of training of military units, but also referred to the donation of military trucks as well as the sale of a certain number of equipment. Active US complicity in increasing the power and effectiveness of the Sri Lankan military appears to have turned around the fighting capacity of the Sri Lankan forces, leading to massacres, war crimes and genocide in the crushing defeat of the Tamil Eelam people. We then move on to the alleged complicity of the Indian state. The tribunal was asked to consider the accusation that the Indian state is guilty of being complicit in the crime of genocide against the Tamil people. The accusation went on to say, in the late 1980s, India intervened against the LTTE in order to gain control over the Tamil population in Sri Lanka as a strategic asset, resulting in the death of 12,000. In the 1990s, India played the role of a junior partner in a strategic alliance with the United States. Thereafter, India subordinated its strategic policy approach towards Sri Lanka under the US paradigm. That's the end of the quote from the accusation. And we go on to report our finding. Owing to the complexity of India's shifting role within the conflict of Sri Lanka, and as there was neither sufficient material evidence nor time for the tribunal to consider properly the aforestated accusation, the panel of judges decided to postpone deliberations on that question. And then we conclude our findings. Recognizing that the Sri Lankan armed forces alone did not have the military capacity to achieve their genocidal ambitions, and given the evidence presented to it, the tribunal believes that the UK, the USA and India are guilty of complicity in genocide. The tribunal judges that the UK and the USA are clearly accomplices in the genocidal process. Regarding the charge against India, the tribunal decides to withhold its final decision, pending the consideration of additional evidence, which could also include examination of the potential role and which could include examination of the potential responsibility of other states, such as China.
Now, I'm going to be reading recommendations. The specific role and aim of the judgment of the Permanent People's Tribunal cannot be confined to the condemnation of entities and persons who must be accountable. The permanent validity of the personal and collective rights which have been violated needs to be declared and hence directed to create space and obligations for the present and the future, when peoples who have been transformed into victims can decide on their lives in dignity. These recommendations frame concrete scenarios which coincide with very concrete and urgent needs that emerge from the proceedings. They have in common the fundamental request for full accountability of those who have been identified as responsible for the genocidal process, and for an urgent and long-term commitment to full restitution to the Ilam Tamil of their rights. Number one, to the United Nations, whose officially recognized systematic failure to take action has had a decisive role in the failure to prevent, as well as in the enactment of the genocidal process against the Ilam Tamil. To provide within the shortest delay a credible account of the determinants of the decisions which led to the interruption of the peace process. To give maximum priority to the establishment of a strategy aimed primarily at stopping the ongoing genocide and also at creating concrete conditions for the Ilam Tamils to exercise their rights to peace and self-determination. The creation of an international commission of inquiry which excludes the states which have been directly and or indirectly linked to the genocidal process could be a first step in this direction. Number two, to the European Union, which had played a positive role with the promotion of the peace process, but later contributed to the implementation of the genocidal process, with its acceptance of the US government's position on the, in quotes, terrorist nature of the Ilam Tamils, to assume the responsibility of providing a transparent report on the reasons that led to the failure of the peace process, to review its external policy in order to ensure that the political, economic, and cultural rights of the Ilam Tamils are respected and promoted with specific attention to the difficult situation of denial and repression created by the Sri Lankan government. To reconsider with high priority its security policy, so strictly dependent on classifications imposed by the US government without regard of due process and irrespective of the evolving nature of liberation and resistance movements. Number 3, to Germany, where it was possible to hold this session, and which is known to have opposed the passive position of the EU with respect to the position of the US government on Sri Lanka, and to other countries of goodwill, to undertake an active role in the prompt enactment of the recommendations directed to the European Union, so that a European policy inspired by human and people's rights can be activated with respect to the peoples of Sri Lanka with the shortest delay. In particular, to promote and request within the pertinent European institutions, Council of the EU, European Commission, and the European Parliament, the adoption of measures directed to ensure the protection and promotion of the rights of the Elam Tamil diaspora in EU member states, specifically with regard to their right to asylum, work, and association, since the protection of the Elam Tamil diaspora is one of the paramount means of fostering the security and well-being of Elam Tamil in Sri Lanka. To identify Elam Tamil in Europe as a resource for disseminating information about the true and accurate situation in Sri Lanka. Number 4, to the state of Sri Lanka, to recognize and publicly discuss as an act of democratic credibility the findings of the independent tribunal, so that the ongoing process of eliminating the identity and existence of Elam Tamils cannot become a scar on a society characterized by the denial of human and people's rights. To stop trying to disguise with its official discourse and its actions the organized process of denial of the fundamental rights of the Elam Tamils, which is being implemented through economic, structural, and cultural policies presented as development projects in which national and international and public and private resources are invested. Number 5, to the international organizations and agencies, governmental as well as non-governmental, which are actively involved in cooperative activities in the area. To be fully aware and informed of the genocidal process which characterizes the situation of Sri Lanka today. To assure that their presence, investments, and interventions are not directly and or ideologically supporting the discriminatory practices of the Sri Lankan government. To coordinate, as far as possible, their actions so that peaceful processes of civic resistance and restitution and promotion of the identity of Elam Tamil can take place in their original territories in Sri Lanka as well as in their diaspora. To support with the maximum urgency and priority and with the aim of an effective coordination and integration all the initiatives of judicial defense and rights recognition as well as of rehabilitation of the victims' genocide, which are taking place in all parts of the world. Further, the tribunal recalls that judicial proceedings through universal jurisdiction in third states that provided should be encouraged and actively pursued in the struggle against impunity. The Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC, International Criminal Court, has already clarified that given that, in quote, Sri Lanka is not a state party to the Rome Statute, the ICC could potentially have jurisdiction over crimes committed by nationals of state parties on the territory of Sri Lanka, unquote. Moreover, the International Criminal Court could potentially have Moreover, the International Criminal Court could potentially have jurisdiction over crimes committed on the territory of a state that is not a party to the Rome Statute by a perpetrator who is not a national of the state party. And this is a repeat. On condition that the Security Council of the United Nations adopts a resolution under Chapter 7 of the Charter, for instance, without any veto from the Big Five, China, France, US, USA, and UK. Consequently, we recommend that the ICC prosecutor monitor closely the development of the situation in Sri Lanka. May the above recommendations accompany the victims of the genocide and the organizations that support them through the very difficult time needed to mobilize the civil society where they live and transform into realities their hopes for full human rights. The tribunal invites the worldwide civil society to commemorate the victims of the genocide that took place in Sri Lanka.
Ladies and gentlemen, lastly, I would just like to express our thanks on behalf of all of us here, of course, the PPT itself, to thank the witnesses and the complainants who came from far afield in many cases. Some from the diaspora, of course, the Tamil community, and others came from Sri Lanka itself, and took some risk in so doing. We appreciate that very much. Without you, of course, we could not have made any decisions or given any advice or made these recommendations we've just heard. I'd also like to thank the Bremen and international volunteers who did all of the work to make this possible, including this press conference today. And I refer to the rapporteurs who, like all of us, are volunteers in this endeavor, who worked tirelessly and long hours to produce very good material, which I believe will turn up in the final report. I'd like to thank the photographers, who, this gentleman in front of me has been standing on the street for now a week almost, and not complaining. And of course, two more volunteers are the two prosecutors, who did a good job under difficult circumstances and in very much last moment endeavor. And I must thank the volunteer who represented the position of Sri Lanka, a difficult thing for any one of us to do. Yes. I'd like to thank the food providers. We have been fed wine and dine, breakfast, lunch, and dinner on many occasions, and we appreciate the Sri Lankan Tamil curry and other niceties. It was a really wonderful service. We were well looked after. I'd like to thank the sound engineers who kept us alive and communicating. I'd like to thank the computer geeks who kept all of our laptops and other devices working most of the time. I'd like to thank all of the organizers, in fact, here on the ground in Bremen, who looked after us so well, and particularly, of course, the drivers and others who gotten us around and got us there in time and made this possible. So generally, all of you, please feel congratulated and thanked for a great endeavor. I know some will be disappointed we didn't deliver perhaps everything you hoped we would do. We also are disappointed in regard to the complicity of India. We will work on that and hope to get back to you with a different decision. And particularly, lastly, thank you to all of the Tamil diaspora who have been working, volunteering, I know in Ireland, and certainly here, and in other parts of the world for this PPT tribunal here in Bremen. Thank you all very much on behalf of all of us.
Thank you.